Welcome. You've found the only channel where you can fall asleep to the soothing hum of bureaucratic inefficiency, political paranoia, and tax codes from 1,000 years ago. If you like what you hear, don't remember what you heard because you were blissfully unconscious. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where and when you're tuning in from. Your feedback is processed in triplicate and then lost in a Byzantine filing cabinet, never to be seen again. Tonight, we embark on a particularly relaxing and disheartening adventure. We are going to explore why you, dear viewer, would not last a single day, nay, not even a single hour within the Byzantine bureaucracy. That glorious, glacial, maddening machine that kept the Eastern Roman Empire functioning in a state of, functional dysfunction for over 1,000 years. Our journey begins, of course, in Constantinople. The year is 1092 CE. A fairly average year in the Byzantine timeline, which is to say there's intrigue at the court, taxes are too high, the peasants are unhappy, and the bureaucrats are flourishing, like mold on a damp scroll. Let's begin your day. You wake in a modest lodging house somewhere along the Mese, the grand thoroughfare of the imperial capital. You are here on business. You are not a tourist, because such things do not exist yet, and even if they did, you could not afford the bribes required to gain access to the good parts of the city. No, you are here to apply for a grain shipping permit. Not to actually ship grain. Of course, you simply wish to apply for the application, to begin the process that will allow you to ship grain, if, in the future, grain ever comes into your possession. The process will be long, expensive, and spiritually draining, but it is, by the standards of the Byzantine Empire, entirely routine. The first challenge of the day is simply finding the right office. You are told to visit the secreta, which sounds appropriately intimidating and vague. The secreta is not a single building, but rather a category of departments housed in various poorly labeled structures around the Palace of Magnora. One building contains the Logothetes II Drumwan office concerned with foreign correspondence and the post. Another houses the Chartularios II Canicleu, whose title is longer than his attention span. Somewhere in the middle of all this is the man who might, possibly, know the man who might be responsible for issuing the grain shipping permit. You wander through marble corridors filled with idle clerks in dusty robes. Everyone has a scroll. No one makes eye contact. Eventually, after asking a guard who refuses to answer unless properly addressed using the correct ceremonial formula, Eugen Estate Hypatos Kai, Chartularios, please bless me with the direction of the sacred ledger of grains. You are directed to a queue. The queue wraps around a courtyard and leads into a narrow hallway where no fewer than 3 minor officials sit behind desks stacked with scrolls that look like they haven't been touched since Emperor Heraclius's beard was still fashionable. You wait. And wait. Eventually, it is your turn. You step forward, present your letter of introduction, yes, that was a prerequisite, and state your intention. The official peers at you, then at your letter, then at the official seal, which he proceeds to test by melting the wax with a candle to confirm it is not counterfeit. It is not. This seems to annoy him. You must take this to the Logothetes II Geniku, he says with a sigh. Next building, 3rd floor. Do not take the stairs, they are being used by the curatories. Use the ladder. You thank him, bow slightly, and go to the next building. The Logothetes II Geniku is in charge of the empire's finances. That might sound impressive until you realize this includes the storage and tracking of every single imperial income stream, from olive taxes to monastic bequests to fines imposed on citizens who insult the emperor's statues. This office alone has enough ledgers to sink a merchant ship. Here you are required to fill out a grammatean, an official document, requesting permission to request another document. This must be written in Greek, using the standard imperial cursive on a specific grade of parchment. Yours is rejected 3 times because your iota looks too much like a smudged epsilon. You are assigned a scribe, a sullen youth, whose entire job is to take dictation and complain about your pronunciation of Scintillea. He tells you that your signature must be countersigned by a notary, and then again by a supervisor. He knows both of them personally. For a small fee, he can make the introductions. You do not have a choice. You pay. By now, half the day is gone. You have not eaten, but you are surrounded by the smells of garlic, sweat, and fading imperial glory. You sit in a vestibule surrounded by frescoes of long-dead emperors, each of whom presumably signed off on some regulation that is still clogging the system today. At this point, a robed figure approaches. He is from the Sekelian, the Treasury Department's internal audit branch. He is here to ensure that you have not paid any bribes. You assure him you haven't. He nods, takes your name, and writes it in a book. He then demands a voluntary gift to confirm the integrity of your statement. You give him a coin. He gives you a receipt. The receipt is not for the coin, but for the statement you made about not paying bribes. This will later be filed under disputed matters. You finally receive a sliper procurine stating that your application has been acknowledged and will be considered pending confirmation from the epikernes, the official responsible for certifying that your household is not harboring any Manichaeans, Bulgars, or unregistered goats. You assure them that you are not. They send a man to check. At this point, you may be wondering why anyone would subject themselves to this kind of ordeal. The answer is simple: stability. The Byzantine bureaucracy, though deeply Byzantine in its inefficiencies, was one of the most durable in the medieval world. It kept records, levied taxes, enforced imperial policy, and controlled trade routes across 3 continents. It was maddening, yes, but it worked. Like an over-engineered, over-inked steam engine made entirely of vellum and fear. Its resilience came not in spite of the bureaucracy, but because of it. Emperors came and went, armies rose and fell, icons were smashed and then lovingly restored. But the bureaucrats? They remained. Cloaked in their layered titles and interchangeable robes, they outlasted dynasties. And so, as your day ends and you collapse into your straw-filled cot, grain permits still unissued, you have experienced the true Byzantine experience. Not the drama of courtly intrigue or the thunder of cathedral domes, but the exhausting hum of procedure, regulation, and eternal circular labor. And tomorrow you will do it again, unless, of course, someone files a complaint about your improper use of honorifics during your last audience. That could delay things for another fortnight. Possibly longer if it's escalated to the nomophylax. Sleep well, you'll need it. You awake the next morning with a stiff neck, a crumpled tunic, and a mild sense of existential collapse. Today, your goal remains simple: follow up on your grain shipping permit. Yesterday, you initiated the process. Today, you must endure the ceremony. Not a literal ceremony, of course. Those at least come with incense and chanting. This one is purely administrative. After a cold rinse in a chipped basin and a breakfast of dry bread and drier gossip from the innkeeper, you shuffle back toward the government quarter. You are now seeking the protonotarios, one of the upper echelons of imperial bureaucracy. If the empire were a human body, the protonotarios would be the nerve clusters overwhelmed, underappreciated, and frequently misfiring. Their job: ensure that all necessary documents related to your grain permit are both signed and sealed in the proper ceremonial order, by the proper officials, using the proper ink and wax. Skipping a step is not only discouraged, it is grounds for denunciation and potential exile to a coastal monastery, where your job would be copying psalms until your eyesight fails. You locate the building, a low structure off the main avenue, adorned with fading murals of various imperial secretaries clutching scrolls and glaring out with eyes that scream, "I died at my desk." You enter, holding your bundle of documents like a penitent monk, bringing offerings to a capricious and mildly bored deity. Inside is the Kibdalos, a junior clerk whose title translates roughly to sealer of very minor things. He peers at your forms and clicks his tongue as though you have presented him with a philosophical paradox instead of a parchment stack. "These were not arranged in hierarchical order," he says flatly. "The seal from the Genicon must be on the top, followed by the epikernes confirmation. This is reversed. Please return when corrected." "But the ink hasn't even dried yet," you mutter. He gives you a look that communicates a millennium of quiet contempt. You walk back out into the sun, which has never felt less welcoming. Eventually, after reordering your papers and paying a boy to deliver coffee and dried figs to the doorman, a traditional and unofficial fee for documental courtesy, You are allowed into the office of impression, so named because its sole function is to stamp things, not analyze them, not approve them, just stamp. The room smells of beeswax and forgotten ambition. Inside, several older men sit behind long desks, each surrounded by seals, stamp pads, small bowls of incense, and racks of holy icons. One is whispering a prayer to Saint Philotheos, patron saint of scribes, as he stamps a permit for olive transport. Another is pausing after each mark to consult his astrologer's notes, just in case Mercury is in retrograde and therefore a poor time for grain authorizations. You wait your turn. Again, you notice that every official here wears a large ring with the imperial eagle on it. These rings are not ceremonial. They are used, quite literally, to press into warm wax and leave a proper impression of authority. Your turn comes. You present your documents with trembling hands. The official, whose nameplate reads Eutychios, examines the scrolls and snorts. You've used the wrong formula in the closing salutation. What formula? You said, "May the empire endure through your grace." That's incorrect for permits involving staple goods. You must write, "May the empire profit through your diligence." The clerk beside him mutters, "Unless the grain is being stored at sea, in which case you must also include with tides fair and pirates distant." You are given a corrected scroll form and asked to recopy the document by hand, ensuring no errors. You are also advised to include a line praising the emperor's mother, just to be safe. You rewrite the scroll. You now know the phrase imperial administrative redundancy, not as a concept, but as a lived experience. You finally receive the coveted sigillion, the official lead seal marking your paperwork as legitimate. You have climbed a small mountain of procedural correctness. But as with all peaks in Byzantium, there is another, taller peak just beyond it. Next, you must register your approved permit with the basilikoi notarioi, or imperial notaries, who serve as record keepers and interdepartmental informants. They maintain ledgers so comprehensive that they could probably tell you how much wheat passed through Antioch in 886 and who sneezed during the transaction. Their building is smaller but more guarded. You are frisked for ink smuggling, a common crime. Rogue scribes frequently steal official ink formulations to forge family records, wills, and on rare occasions apology letters from deceased saints. The head notary, a man with ink-stained fingers and a scroll case chained to his belt, takes your documents and places them into an enormous leather-bound ledger that weighs more than your dignity. He then assigns it a code, GP Delta 1143-2. This is now your official tracking number. You are told to memorize it. You are not allowed to write it down, lest it be used by rivals to forge your permit. You repeat it under your breath. GP Delta 1143-2. Then you are handed another form. This one is for the practicon, a receipt confirming that your seal was filed under the correct year, under the correct fiscal calendar. Because you've forgotten, let me remind you, the Byzantine calendar is currently counting from the supposed creation of the world, not the birth of Christ. It is the year 6,600-something. No one really agrees. But if your practicon lists the wrong era, your grain permit is retroactively invalidated. As you exit the notary building, you are approached by a man in dark robes who asks if you have registered your ephadikon. You stare at him, lips dry. My, what? Ephadikon, the anti-heresy certification. All permits for consumables must be verified as doctrinally sound. You blink, he blinks. You agree to follow him to the Office of Heretical Foodstuff Compliance, a department so obscure even the emperor forgets it exists. There, a solemn man recites a creed over your grain-related documents, sprinkles holy water on the signature block, and then stamps the entire packet with the mark of orthodox digestibility. You are cleared to proceed. But here, gentle viewer, is where we must pause and appreciate the finer mechanics at play. The Byzantine bureaucracy was more than a maze. It was a worldview, an ideology, a lifestyle. Each signature was an act of loyalty. Each stamp, a tiny prayer that the empire would persist for one more generation. It was not meant to be efficient, it was meant to be sacred, and sacred things are not hurried. Even basic permits had theological overtones. The church and state were so entwined that one could not move a crate of salted fish without checking for doctrinal irregularities. The emperor was not merely a monarch. He was God's regent on earth, and thus every bureaucratic interaction had a faint spiritual tint. That's why a poorly worded grain request could be seen not only as sloppy paperwork, but as a veiled insult to divine order. Of course, this didn't stop the occasional enterprising merchant from bribing his way through the system with candied figs, icon donations, or discreetly delivered silver. But on paper it was all very proper. As evening falls, you now hold in your hands a stamped, sealed, signed, and sanctified grain permit. It has been 36 hours. You have aged considerably. Your hand cramps from writing, your eyes twitch from rereading imperial formulae, and your soul has been thoroughly processed. You are told with a smile that the permit will need to be renewed in 3 months. Naturally, it will be a slightly different process next time. The form has changed. The ink must be green instead of black. And the current logothetes has recently fallen out of favor, so his seal is no longer valid. You nod, softly. You accept this. You are now, fully and irrevocably, Byzantine. By now, you have survived roughly 2 full days in the Byzantine bureaucracy. You've waited in endless lines, rewritten the same document in 6 different formats, and had your scrolls blessed, stamped, and salted against spiritual contamination. You have also spent most of your money on bribes so small they can only be described as symbolic extortion. Congratulations, you are now ready to begin employment within this system. You've secured a temporary post as a hypographius, or assistant scribe. Technically, your role is to transcribe minor correspondence and keep track of minor departmental transactions requests for horse fodder, petitions to open a barrel of wine stored in the imperial cellar, that sort of thing. But in reality, your job is to survive. Not just the tedium, but the politics. You see, the Byzantine civil service was not just a machine, it was a battlefield. Every colleague is a potential threat. Every memo is a test. Every misfiled document is an opportunity for ruin. The corridors of power in Constantinople are slick with rumor and sharpened with whispers. Let us walk you through what your average morning might look like. You arrive precisely at the 8th hour after dawn. Any earlier, and you're seen as too ambitious a threat. Any later, and you're seen as lazy a target. You wear your regulation robe. It is grey. Everyone's robe is grey. You do not wear colors unless you are a eunuch in the imperial palace, a cleric, or very recently deceased. Your superior is a chartularios, a man named Irenaeus who smells of vinegar and dictation ink. His mood fluctuates depending on whether or not his cousin in the Senate has written him lately. Today, the cousin has not. Therefore, Irenaeus is in a state of mild loathing. Your desk is a plank balanced between 2 amphorae. It is your honor to sit there. You are given a stack of communications to transcribe, all concerning the recent shortage of mule harnesses in the region of Lydia. You have no idea where Lydia is. You assume it is far away and full of mule-related drama. As you work, the office murmurs with rumors. The logothetes ton secretonen of the highest administratorsis, rumored to be on the verge of disgrace. Someone discovered that his niece married a man whose brother was once overheard saying the emperor had a weak chin. The emperor does in fact have a weak chin, but that is not the point. The point is who said it and why. Suddenly, a man is escorted out of the building. You don't know his name. You never learned it. He didn't talk much. That might have been his mistake. Silence implies secrets. He is gone, just like that. No one says anything, but everyone crosses themselves in the direction of Hagia Sophia. Around the 10th hour, a courier arrives with a scroll marked Hotinos urgent. It is not urgent. It concerns the inheritance rights of a minor landowner in Bithynia who claims his cousin forged an imperial tax relief edict by using mashed apricots as ink. You are tasked with comparing the scroll's seal with archived examples. There are over 200 seals from the same office in the last decade. They all look identical. You begin to cry internally. You are interrupted by an audit. A stern man in green robes appears in the doorway. He is a mystikos, an imperial inspector with an impressive title, unclear authority, and the right to overturn nearly anything he doesn't like the look of. He asks to see the ink ledger. You hand it to him. He counts the ink pots listed, 11. Then he checks your storage, 10 ink pots. The missing one was borrowed yesterday by an official from the Department of Roads, but you didn't log it because you weren't told to, because the man took it without asking, because he was a friend of Irenaeus. Now the Mystikos raises an eyebrow. At this moment, you are at a crossroads. You can blame your superior and hope he's too distracted to retaliate. Take the fall and hope your humility is rewarded. Claim you were never assigned ink pot tracking duties and insinuate a conspiracy against you. You choose option 2. Irenaeus hears of your decision and does not acknowledge it, but later you find a wax cake and a single fig on your desk. In Byzantine terms, this is a grand gesture of solidarity. You eat both and feel a brief flicker of peace. Then comes the noon hour. Lunch is a communal affair: bread, cheese, and very quiet chewing. No one talks, not because of protocol, but because the walls have ears. Literally. The building you work in is adjacent to the Basilica Palatia, the imperial residence complex. It is rumored that certain clerks in the palace have been given listening assignments. Some even say the walls were designed with acoustic funnels, channeling conversations straight into hidden passages where eunuchs take notes in invisible ink. You say nothing. You chew. You listen. You nod. A colleague mutters that his neighbor was dismissed last week for failing to include a flourish in the final signature of an epistolary decree. Another says he heard the emperor prefers round script now, not angular. Another whispers that one of the Chartularioi was denounced for using too much ink. Too much ink. Too much enthusiasm in writing the phrase, imperial blessings. Too many adverbs. Too much. In Byzantium, the path to advancement was narrow and shadowed. Promotion came not from talent, but from survival, from not being the one caught asleep at your scroll when the empire needed a scapegoat. You could be a genius with calligraphy, a savant with ledgers, a whisperer of imperial tax schedules, and still lose your position because someone thought your sandals looked too Italian. So you learn the most important lesson of all: anonymity is safety. You stop correcting your superiors. You stop asking for clarification. You stop signing your name in a flourish. You do what is expected, exactly as expected, no more, no less. As the sun descends, and the scent of olive oil and resignation wafts through the halls, you complete your final task, copying a list of imperial property disputes from the year 991. The scroll you are working from is water-damaged and partially eaten by mice. You are told to reconstruct what you can, and to maintain the spirit of the original. You're not sure what the spirit of a rodent-chewed real estate lawsuit looks like. You make educated guesses, no one notices, or if they do, they say nothing. As you file your last document of the day into a lacquered case bound in oxhide, you catch your reflection in a nearby bronze plate. You look older, more careful, more Byzantine. That evening, at your lodging house, you write a short letter to no one in particular. It is addressed simply to whomsoever in the next century will understand. In it, you describe the sensation of existing inside a government that cannot die, only reorganize. You reflect that this empire, for all its flaws, still functions. Roads are paved, armies are paid, diplomats write very polite lies to very dangerous people, and somehow, your grain permit exists. Somehow, the ledger moves forward. Somehow, you have survived the day. Just barely. You return to the office the next day as a changed person. Not better, not wiser, just slightly more adept at feigning enthusiasm. Today's lesson is one that every servant of the Byzantine state must learn, that titles, those glittering, mouth-filling honorifics, are both everything and absolutely nothing at the same time. In the Byzantine world, everyone has a title. Some have 6, some are made up on the spot, some are purely ceremonial, some are technically outlawed but still used in polite whispers. There are more titles than actual people, and like everything else in the empire, they are arranged in careful hierarchies with vaguely defined rules. Your current title is Hypographius of minor communications, a rank that sits somewhere just below unpaid kitchen ledger assistant and just above man who refills inkwells without comment. It doesn't matter. What matters is aspiration. Across the hall from your desk sits a man who insists on being addressed as Sebastos Kai Protospatharios. This translates to something like venerable and first sword bearer, which sounds rather impressive until you realize he hasn't wielded anything sharper than a stylus in 2 decades. He is in charge of the Bureau of Naval Correspondence. There is currently no navy. Still, every morning he dons his robed-eyed imperial purple at the hem, but only in the lining, which technically doesn't break the law about reserving purple for the emperor. He wears a heavy bronze medallion denoting his honorary posting in the year 1053. He reminds everyone of this frequently. He is also third cousin to someone who once brought a mule to the palace gates and was not arrested. That too counts for something. You are summoned to a minor meeting with the logothetes to Stratiotikou, the bureaucrat responsible for military finances. Do not be fooled by the martial-sounding name. He has not seen a battlefield. But he has seen the quarterly pay records for every Thracian archer unit between 1010 and 1070, and that makes him dangerous. You enter the meeting chamber. It is poorly lit, and smells faintly of lamp oil and unresolved budget discrepancies. Before anything can be discussed, ceremonial greetings must be exchanged. The logothetes' full title is Eugenistatos logothetes to Stratiotikou, Kyrios tes deuterou taxios, Kitor to monasteriou argumamas, Kai sigalos to patriarchou. You are expected to recite this when addressing him. You must also bow, twice, once for the office, once for the monastery donation. You get it wrong the first time. He corrects you with a smile so thin it could be used as papyrus. In Byzantium, the inflation of titles was an art form. In theory, titles reflected one's role and rank. In practice, they functioned more like ceremonial wallpaper, covering over crumbling authority with a fresh layer of glorified adjectives. Here are just a few titles you might encounter. Vestarches, a title suggesting some vague court dignity, often given as a consolation prize. Anthipatos, vice-consul, a meaningless honor for retirees who needed something to put on their gravestones. Kouropalates, keeper of the palace, though no one could tell you what they were keeping. Proedros, president, in a society with no elections. Magistros, a senior official, often simultaneously retired and still haunting the payroll. The empire was flooded with titles that were lavish in name and hollow in function. They could be bought, inherited, or awarded for managing not to offend anyone for a sufficiently long period of time. And with every new title came a new robe. Ah, the robes. To the outsider, a Byzantine office may look like a riot of grey cloth and indifference, but to the trained eye, every thread is coded. The cut of the sleeve, the angle of the collar, the width of the sash. These things matter. Your robe, as a humble hypographius, is plain wool with minimal trim. It signals your status clearly, expendable, replaceable, and unlikely to be missed. Your colleague Petros, however, wears a robe with embroidered kufsa sign that he once served as a dikanikos, or junior legal advisor. He never lets anyone forget this. He walks with a certain tilt to ensure that the sleeve embroidery catches the candlelight. You once overheard him practicing his title aloud in the scriptorium during lunch. Petros, formerly Dikanikos, now Logariastes of third-level grain transactions, unworthy but faithful. It sounds like a prayer. It is one. Of course, the emperor did create titles at will. If he liked you, you might become a protovestiarios, even if you had no idea what vestiarios meant. If he was angry, he might revoke your title publicly in the hippodrome, while a scribe read a declaration of your failures. Your robe would be cut, your sash removed, and your hatif taken away and stomped upon. This is why most officials kept spare robes hidden under their desks, just in case. But titles weren't just for show. They had economic consequences. Your salary, your exemption from certain taxes, your right to own property in the capital all, could hinge on what your scroll said you were. And because most titles didn't require you to actually do anything, Byzantine society produced an entire subclass of men whose primary job was maintaining their title. You could spend your entire career as a holder of dignities, carefully navigating court politics, marrying strategically, making donations to the right monasteries, and most importantly, avoiding scandal. You might think the safest course was to keep your head down. You would be wrong, because in Byzantium, obscurity is dangerous. If no one notices you, you can be blamed for anything. A fire, a failed tax shipment, a suspicious fish smell in the patriarch's quarters, you might become the convenient scapegoat. Better to be visible, vaguely respected, and firmly connected. That, too, becomes a full-time job. Later that day, you are summoned to a small ceremonial reception hosted by a mid-level palace official who has just been awarded the honorary title of silentiarios. The silentiarios were once responsible for maintaining silence in the imperial palace. That role has long since vanished. Now, it is simply a way of telling someone, you're not important, but we don't want you to feel bad about it. Still, there is a reception. There is honeyed wine, flat bread, and polite clapping. The newly titled man gives a short speech about continuing to serve the eternal machinery of our radiant empire. He then retires to a back room, where he will spend the remainder of the day reclining on a divan and trying to have his new title embroidered on a pillow. You return to your desk. Your inkwell is missing again. You do not investigate. As dusk falls and the bureaucrats shuffle out of the building, robes rustling like dry leaves, you watch them carefully. Each walks with the knowledge that their dignity, however artificialis, their only armor. Strip that away, and they are simply men with brittle bones and coffee-stained fingers. But with the right robe, the right title, and the right tone of voice, they can wield power that outlives armies. That, more than anything, is the Byzantine miracle. The idea that words on parchment, if carefully arranged and extravagantly stamped, can shape the fate of an empire. It is your 5th day in the service of the Byzantine state. You now know to arrive on time, to nod without committing to opinions, and to never ever compliment an official's robe unless asked directly twice. You've memorized your building's layout, which lavatory to avoid after midday, and where the extra ink is hidden behind a loose tile under the icon of St. Basil. You are beginning to suspect, however, that the true work of the Byzantine bureaucracy has nothing to do with policy, economics, or the distribution of grain. It is, instead, devoted to the careful generation and eternal preservation of paperwork, an infinite loop of scrolls written, revised, filed, copied, and then ceremonially ignored. You spend the morning transcribing a correspondence log between the Sekelian and the Logothetes Tudromu, two departments currently arguing about who is responsible for a shipment of expired horse ointment. The letters go back 10 years. The ointment no longer exists. The argument does. Each letter begins with a 4-line invocation to Christ, a quote from the Psalms, and an effusive acknowledgement of the recipient's wisdom, loyalty, and fragrance. Then come 7 to 10 paragraphs of passive-aggressive accusations, each cloaked in flowery circumlocution. You begin to wonder if this is what the empire is really made of, not walls or armies, but a dense fog of documents in which every problem is never resolved, only eloquently described. In the afternoon, a courier arrives from the provinces. He carries a leather satchel filled with reports, mostly land surveys, revenue estimates, and complaints about monks who are allegedly smuggling walnuts across diocesan boundaries. You are instructed to sort these into 3 categories: matters requiring imperial attention, matters requiring ecclesiastical consultation, matters requiring indefinite postponement. Category 3 fills up the fastest. By now you've noticed a peculiar trend. Nothing is ever fully completed. Your colleague Myron has been working on a petition regarding bridge repairs in Cappadocia for 4 years. He has filed 9 copies of the report, consulted 4 different departments, and held 2 official discussions with engineers. The bridge collapsed last winter. The paperwork continues. Another clerk, Theodoros, is responsible for logging monastery donations. When asked about a missing entry from 1048, he shrugs and says the scribe at the time went blind mid-sentence and died on the spot. The entry ends with, "May the Lord receive our H." No one corrected it. It remains on record. As a reward for not publicly complaining this week, you are allowed to accompany a delegation to the Scuophalakion, the imperial storage archive, located in the dusty underbelly of Constantinople. It is both a library and a tomba paper mausoleum filled with tax ledgers, legal decrees, weather reports, and maps that no longer correspond to any known territory. The archivist, a quiet man named Stephanos with fingers permanently stained black from ink and despair, guides you down a spiral staircase into a humidity-soaked room lined with scrolls wrapped in oilcloth. These, he whispers reverently, are the minutes from the Council of 843 on monastic bread rations. You stare at the scrolls. They radiate mildew and judgment. Stephanos continues, every scroll is logged by subject, origin, and scent. Scent? You ask. Of course, he says. Mice prefer certain ink blends. It helps us anticipate decay. You nod, slowly. This feels insane. But you are in Byzantium, where even insanity is carefully catalogued. What makes it worse, what truly separates the Byzantine bureaucratic experience from its merely chaotic Western counterparts, is the layer of paranoia that coats everything like stale candle soot. No decision is ever made in isolation. If you approve a document too quickly, your motives are suspect. If you delay, you are either incompetent or plotting. If you follow the rules exactly, it might be a trick. This is a state governed by suspicion, where secrets are currency and the truth is considered a risky indulgence. Even your handwriting is analyzed. Too neat. You're hiding something. Too messy. You're untrustworthy. Too inconsistent. You may be a double agent. For whom? No one knows. Probably the Bulgars, or the Latins, or the icon painters. The paranoia is not without precedent. The empire has endured centuries of revolts, assassinations, theological civil wars, and people being flung off palace walls because someone whispered the wrong thing during Lent. In such an environment, bureaucracy becomes not just a tool of governance, it becomes a survival mechanism. Keep everything documented, keep it vague, keep it retrievable. That way, if you're ever accused of something, you can say, "Ah yes, but I sent a memo in 1073 regarding that precise matter, and you, sir, initialed it in ochre ink." No one will read the memo. But the fact that it exists means you might live another day. You return to your desk and begin drafting a referral notice, a formal way of telling another office that your office is aware of a matter but does not wish to be responsible for it. The proper format includes 1. Invocation to the Theotokos. 2. Rhetorical questions implying incompetence elsewhere. 1 final paragraph that subtly passes the burden along without stating so directly. You use phrases like, "In the spirit of imperial unity, we yield administrative discretion to those best suited to interpret the matter," which translates roughly to, "Not it." As evening comes, you find yourself alone in the scriptorium. The others have left for vespers or wine. You're still here, copying a list of minor heresies that may or may not have been committed by the monks of Mount Athos during a goat census. The list includes failure to chant the full 9th ode of the canon, misuse of vinegar during a fast, inappropriate excitement during liturgical dance. Each entry must be copied twice, once for the bishopric, once for the imperial record. You finish, close the scroll, and seal it with wax. The wax melts into the parchment. You curse softly. You scrape it off. Begin again. You are now part of this system. You breathe its ink. You sweat its ink. You dream in marginalia. And as you prepare to leave, the night shift clerk hands you a note. You have been summoned to appear before the logothetes to Geniku. Purpose undisclosed. Bring documentation. You stare at the message. What documentation? Which scroll? What did you do? You begin listing possibilities. That time you borrowed parchment from the treasury desk without logging it. The small wax spill that may have obscured a bishop's name. The letter you signed last week where you accidentally called a noble modest instead of magnificent. Any of these could end your career, or be entirely ignored, or get you promoted. There is no way to tell. That is the genius of Byzantine governance. Infinite ambiguity, infinite paper, and infinite consequences. It is the end of the 14th century. The empire suck as it still Aishas withered to a handful of cities, a coastline, and an impressive collection of ceremonial hats. The glory of Justinian is a whisper. The armies are threadbare, the economy is brittle, and the treasury is mostly filled with IOUs and broken promises from tax farmers long since vanished into the hills. And yet the bureaucracy endures. In a government building just outside the Blachine Palace in Constantinople, a man sits at a desk. He wears a robe that has been patched 15 times, but still bears the blue cuffs of a Grammaticosa junior official whose job is to update the index of land grants that no longer exist. His name is irrelevant, his job is eternal. This is the final, most incomprehensible beauty of the Byzantine state, that even as it dies, it does not acknowledge death. It simply continues to record, to stamp, to file. It drafts decrees for provinces that have been conquered. It updates census forms for towns under siege. It processes the tax filings of ghosts. The empire no longer controls Thessaloniki, but it still issues permits for exporting wine from its vineyards. A Turkish emirate now holds the land. The wine no longer arrives. The paperwork is on time. You, dear viewer, have now been promoted or reassigned. In the year 1394, you are appointed assistant to the Logariastes of Imperial Residual Holdings, a role invented only last week. Your job is to oversee the filing of land revenues that were supposed to be delivered to the emperor's summer villa in Bithynia, which has not had a functioning door since 1369. The office still receives reports. Someone, somewhere, is still measuring olive yields and sending the numbers. You suspect they're fabricated, but to question them would be irregular. You transcribe them faithfully, as is your duty. At lunch, you eat stale barley bread in the courtyard. The pigeons are bolder now. One tries to steal your fig. You do not resist. This is his empire now. Across the courtyard, 2 scribes are arguing about the correct form of address for a Bulgarian prince who died 3 decades ago. The argument is not academic. It determines how a letter will be copied and stored. The letter will never be sent. The archive that holds it is moldy, but the address must be correct. Otherwise, chaos. Let's pause here and reflect. Most empires collapse with violence. The Western Roman Empire cracked like old marble under the weight of migrations, civil war, and administrative decay. The Abbasid Caliphate splintered. The Carolingians faded. But Byzantium? Byzantium was filed away. Each generation copied the laws, updated the margins, changed a date, modified a name. The bureaucracy kept moving even as the empire's body withered. It had become self-sustaining. A nervous system still firing, long after the limbs had gone numb. This was not inefficiency. This was faith. The men and women of this machine believed, to their final days, in the moral power of process. In the midst of sieges, emperors still issued edicts regulating brick sizes. When the Genoese controlled the ports, clerks still filed naval requisitions for ships that would never sail. When the Turks camped outside the city walls, officials wrote letters asking for clarification on monastery boundaries. When there was no money left to pay soldiers, the payroll was updated anyway. It wasn't madness, it was Byzantium. You return to your office after lunch to find a new assignment. Review the ecclesiastical property holdings in Thrace. Thrace has not been under imperial control for 40 years. The assignment includes 32 scrolls, most copied and recopied since the Komnenian dynasty. Your task is to compare them against the current archive. The archive is a pile of boxes. The boxes are labeled, in order. Thrace, unsorted. Thrace, sorted, then unsorted again. Thrace, for emergency use only. Thrace, maybe burn later. You consult the oldest scroll first. It lists a series of vineyards owned by the Church of St. Mamas. One of them was supposedly lost to a lightning strike in 1237. The record includes a full description of the thunderclap. You update the entry to include this note. Status unknown. Threat of divine interference ongoing. Your superior, a man with no teeth and 12 titles, nods in approval. That night, you attend Vespers at the crumbling church of the Pantocrator. Inside, the icons are faded. The choir is down to 4 voices, but still they sing. Back in your quarters you try to sleep. You are disturbed by the sound of rats fighting over the ink rags. One of them wins. You admire his strategy. You dream of scrolls falling like leaves. You try to catch one. It turns into a title, then a robe, then a desk, then a city. You wake up tired. The next day, the empire shrinks again. A fortress in the Peloponnese is lost. The logothetes of military affairs holds a quiet ceremony, during which he issues a formal request for 3 new horses that will never arrive. You are assigned to draft a letter acknowledging the loss, without mentioning the loss. The letter begins, "We acknowledge the transition of stewardship in the region formerly known as Fort Castellian. We pray the administrative order therein continues with vigor and Christian dignity." It is signed by 3 men who still pretend they have authority. It is countersigned by you. Your pen is now more powerful than any sword in the empire. That's not a metaphor. The army is unpaid, the walls are crumbling, and the emperor owes money to every merchant in Pera. But your pen is still sharp, still steady. You write, you transcribe, you file. The world falls. You alphabetize it. Years pass. You grow old at your desk. The titles change again. The emperor dies. His son inherits nothing but the crown and a library of unsigned scrolls. You receive word that the monks of Athos have started mailing petitions to the Sultan instead. You add them to the archive. By now, your hands shake, but you still stamp the seal straight. You still correct the margins. You still whisper the ceremonial formulae before copying imperial orders. You don't know who reads them, but you do your duty. Because the empire, in its essence, was never territory. It was ink. It is the spring of 1453. The air is heavy, the sky is grey, the world is ending. Outside the walls of Constantinople, Mehmed II, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, waits with cannons the kind that break stone, silence cathedrals, and do not care about the correct formatting of a fiscal decree. Inside the city, panic simmers. The population has shrunk to a ghost of what it once was. The soldiers are few, the nobles are exhausted, the churches echo, but the bureaucrats? They are still working. Let us imagine you now, a seasoned functionary, a greying servant of the empire, cloaked in a threadbare robe, walking with a limp caused by 3 decades of stair climbing and ink-stained slippers. Your job today is to review the imperial personnel lister record of who is currently employed by what remains of the Byzantine government. This task is ceremonial. Many of the men on the list are dead, others have defected, vanished, or been promoted to positions that no longer exist. But the list must be maintained. The list must be updated. You take your place at your desk in the imperial chancery, now housed in the corner of a palace with a partially collapsed roof. There is one working window. A cat lives in the corner and supervises your work. You dip your stylus into the last surviving inkpot. It is nearly dry. The ink smells of vinegar and desperation, but still you write, Georgios Ducas, proedros kai notarios absent without leave, possibly eaten by wolves, pending confirmation. You underline pending confirmation. You file the record. Elsewhere in the building, your colleague Anthemius is transcribing the final tax receipts from Galata. Galata is not under imperial control anymore, but someone submitted the forms, possibly ironically. Anthemius is crying softly as he writes, not out of sadness, out of pride. It is important, he murmurs, that the accounts be balanced. You nod. Of course, the books must close correctly. If civilization collapses and the ledgers are off by a single numisma, future archaeologists might get the wrong idea. They might think you were lazy. And you were many things, but not lazy. The siege is intensifying. The Ottomans have breached the outer walls. Panic grips the population. People run through the streets carrying icons, relics, and furniture. But in the palace registry office, a small group of clerks is methodically transferring the most important documents into clay jars. A senior official with a wax seal ring on his pinky finger barks orders. Scrolls on land distribution top priority. Family registries pack them tightly. Leave the hymnals. We have too many hymnals. He turns to you. You, the grain permits, the good ones, not the heretical batch. You nod and begin loading scrolls into a satchel, even as the ground shakes beneath your feet. This is your calling, to be calm in the chaos, to be correct in the collapse. That night, the city's defenders brace for what will likely be the final assault. The emperor himself leads the men at the Theodosian walls. Sword in hand, he wears armor passed down through centuries of kings who once ruled Egypt, Syria, and Rome. You, meanwhile, are in the chancery relabeling stamp drawers. The labels have faded. You've been meaning to replace them for years. You can't go to your grave knowing the agricultural exceptions, domestic, seal is in the wrong drawer. You re-ink the parchment tab and affix it with glue made from fish bones. You are ready for death. The city falls on May 29th. It begins in the early morning, a breach in the walls, a rush of janissaries, screaming, steel, smoke. The palace of Blakeney is taken. The Hagia Sophia is stormed. But in one forgotten corridor of the Imperial Archive, a handful of civil servants gather around a table for what will be the last meeting of the Byzantine bureaucracy. There is no agenda, no formal prayer, just the passing of one last decree, hastily signed by trembling hands. Let it be recorded that on this day, the empire of the Romans did cease to govern. Let the scrolls remain, so that memory endures. It is stamped by you with the imperial eagle, now chipped and worn. The wax is cracked, but it holds. Let's linger here for a moment. Breathe in the parchment dust. Listen to the silence before the door breaks. Understand what's about to be, stand what, strangely, will remain. The Ottomans will take the city. They will usher in a new age, new officials, new scribes, new paper, and far fewer scrolls. But some of these records will survive. Some clerk, years from now, will open a box and find a neatly labeled document titled Annual Olive Production Report 1450, 3 region, unknown, status, unreachable, outlook, prayerful. And in that moment, he will know that someone you filed this while the empire was dying. You did your job. History will remember emperors, generals, and saints, but hidden between their stories folded in vellum and sealed in waxware, the stories of those who simply kept writing, who kept order as long as order could be kept, who greeted the end not with a scream but with a citation, who did not try to change the world, but rather catalogued its unraveling with humility and impeccable formatting. And now you know why you would not survive a day in a Byzantine bureaucracy. Not because of the workload, not because of the paranoia, not because of the ink stains, the titles, or the endless scrolls, but because when the world ends, most people run. You would be expected to document it. At this point in your brief and battered career as a Byzantine bureaucrat, you have learned to fear 3 things above all: misplaced documents, ambiguous instructions, and men who speak exclusively in the passive voice. But now, you're about to encounter a 4th, the eunuch class. You may have noticed them already, always near the palace, always speaking softly but with absolute certainty, robes of impeccable quality. Their offices tend to smell faintly of myrrh and aged vellum. They have no children, no dynasties, no distractions, only power. And now, one of them has taken an interest in your department. This morning, just after the bells of the 2nd hour and before the customary silent loaf of bread, word arrives that a new overseer has been appointed to manage interdepartmental communications between the Logothetes Teugeniku and the imperial court. His name is Nikitas, and his title is long enough to require its own scroll. Praepositus Sacri Cubiculi, the Grand Chamberlain. In other words, the man who literally controls access to the emperor's bedchamber. Technically, this has nothing to do with grain permits or regional tax filings. In practice, it means that Nikitas now controls your funding, your promotion pathway, and whether your department gets fresh ink this quarter. You tighten your robe. You try to breathe. Nikitas arrives just after midday. He does not walk so much as glide, followed by 2 assistants who carry nothing but a cushion and an oil lamp. He says nothing for the first 5 minutes. He simply looks. At desks, at people, at your hands. Then, without preamble, he speaks. The scent of lemon oil is insufficient. The wax seals are misaligned. The ink is pooling. He doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. This is what real power sounds like: quiet, critical, and inevitable. He instructs the department to submit a weekly report detailing all correspondences exceeding 4 lines, any memorandum copied more than once, and all documents referencing the phrase as previously noted. He wants summaries of summaries. He wants annotations of your footnotes. He wants the spirit of the text, in triplicate. You do not question him. You spend the afternoon correcting spacing on the margins of scrolls previously deemed flawless. Your colleague Petros, in a moment of overconfidence, notes aloud that such reports seem unnecessary. 3 days later, he is reassigned to the Department of Animal Feed Calculations in a rural posting with no known livestock. The message is clear. Nicetas hears everything. That's the thing about eunuchs in Byzantine service. They weren't just tolerated, they were essential. In a society ruled by bloodlines, the eunuch was a man both inside and outside the system. He could be trusted with secrets because he could not found a rival dynasty. He could move between church and state, palace and monastery, unseen and unchallenged. The emperor often trusted his eunuch attendants more than his own sons. And why not? Sons rebel, eunuchs record everything and forget nothing. Nicetas begins sending personal feedback on your work. 1 scroll is returned with a single line of commentary. This comma implies doubt. The empire doubts nothing. You correct it. You remove the comma. You remove yourself emotionally from the text. You become a vessel. Another scroll is rejected with a more chilling note. The 4th paragraph lacks piety. It is a shipping ledger. You rewrite it, beginning with a verse from the Psalms. It is accepted. You begin to understand how the system works under eunuch control. There is no open aggression. There is no shouting. Only small notes, small corrections, a shift in your office placement, a delay in your pay, a suggestion that your use of ink is enthusiastic, that your handwriting might reflect excessive confidence. You learn to write smaller, to think smaller, to exist in the spaces between Nicetas's expectations. He never praises. He only permits. There is a whisper, of course, that Nicetas has more influence than the emperor himself, that nothing is signed without his input, that foreign embassies bribe him with exotic oils and caged birds just for a chance to meet someone who once shared a hallway with him. One day, you are chosen to deliver a scroll directly to his office. You climb 7 flights of marble stairs into a suite lit only by a single window. Nicetas is seated on a cushion. He does not rise. He holds a scroll in his lap, unopened. He speaks. Do you know why the empire has lasted this long? You do not answer. You weren't aware this was a question with a correct response. He continues. Because we wrote things down, because we remembered, and because we made certain that no one ever felt completely safe. He takes the scroll. He does not thank you. You leave the room knowing that you've just heard Byzantium's entire administrative philosophy. That night, you copy your weekly report 4 times. 1 in standard form, 1 in cleaner calligraphy, 1 annotated, and 1 just in case. You do not sleep well. No one does under Nicetas. You dream of scrolls correcting themselves, of ink whispering judgment. You wake, check your spelling, and prepare for the next inspection. Because in Byzantium, the greatest power is not the sword. It's the man who decides whether your scroll is worthy of being read. You are summoned just after matins. Your superior, a thin man with a permanent cough and a suspiciously ink-free robe, informs you that you've been selected for an external accounting pilgrimage. This sounds religious. It is not. You are being sent to the monastery of the most serene ledger of St. Mamas, located 2 hours from Constantinople in the hills overlooking the Bosphorus. The monastery is known less for its miracles than for its flawless grain tallies and extremely well-documented roof repairs. The purpose of your visit? To coordinate the update of imperial land tithe records with monastic accounting scrolls. In other words, you're going to compare 2 different sets of numbers that should match but almost certainly won't because one was calculated by monks and the other by imperial accountants, both of whom believe the other group is sinning through arithmetic. You pack 3 scrolls, an ink pot, a prayer token, and 1 spare quill. You do not pack hope. The monastery is quiet, stone-built, and smells of wax, lentils, and unvoiced criticism. Upon arrival, you are greeted by Brother Timon, the protoscribe, a monk whose voice is so soft you wonder if he's entirely real. He welcomes you with the following sentence: "The Lord teaches humility, but our margins require assertiveness." You nod. This seems like a warning. You are given a place at the scriptorium's long central table. It is flanked by candlelit niches and attended by 5 monks who look at you as if you are both guest and test. They hand you their book of holdings, a vast ledger bound in goatskin and clasped with a nail from a saint's relic chest. Inside, each property, donation, and barley tithe is listed, cross-referenced, color-coded, and blessed. The monks maintain meticulous records. Every donated vineyard is mapped, every donated donkey is named, and every grain tax is followed by a brief moral reflection. Example: Year of our Lord 6886. Brother Matthias contributed 11 sacks of barley. May his soul be unburdened of pride in this offering, for the Lord detests vanity in yield. You are asked to match these entries against the imperial records, which are stored in a series of scrolls that were lightly singed during a storage fire and now smell of burnt thyme. You get to work. Immediately, the trouble begins. The monks record donations in liturgical years dating from Easter to Easter. The empire uses fiscal years, which begin with the Feast of St. Basil, unless a war pushes the budget meeting later. The monks measure grain in modioi, but the empire recalibrated the modios to reflect military necessity, effectively making 1 monk modios equal to 93 imperial modioi. This may sound minor. It is not. The difference has triggered 6 decades of quiet tension between the Office of Ecclesiastical Finance and the Brotherhood of the Holy Tabulations. At one point, Brother Timon leans over and says, "When you reduce our grain in your scrolls, you reduce our prayer. You write this down, not for the records, just in case someone accuses you of heresy later." At noon, the monks break for lentil stew and a brief chanted service called the Office of Measured Mercy. You are not invited to the chanting. Outsiders tend to throw off the rhythm. You sit alone and review the scrolls. There is an entry for a donated olive grove, listed as belonging to an unnamed widow whose husband died righteously of tax anxiety. You attempt to locate this property in the imperial logs, only to find a note that it was requisitioned in 1372 and converted into a government donkey station. No one updated the monks. You circle the entry and prepare for confrontation. The meeting takes place after Vespers. Brother Timon, 2 elders, and a junior monk with unusually good penmanship gather around you. You explain the discrepancy. You show your scroll. They show theirs. Then Brother Timon produces a 3rd scroll, a vision report, in which one of the elders had a dream that the olive grove still belonged to the monastery in heaven, regardless of its earthly repurposing. This, they argue, nullifies the imperial seizure. You are not trained in theological logic. You suggest noting the grove as theologically disputed. Everyone agrees this is fair. A compromise is written and sealed with both wax and holy water. By the 3rd day, you begin to respect the monastic clerks. Their records are obsessively detailed, yes, but also strangely human. Next to a donation of 14 goats in 1431, there's a margin note: 2 returned, 2 unruly. One ledger includes a list of quill failures, with dates and causes. Another scroll includes a running commentary of the weather during particularly difficult calculations. Rained, mood low, ink runny. You begin to feel at home. You copy your own notes in their style. You add your own commentary. Compared entries: discrepancy noted, breathing shallow, tea insufficient. By week's end, the ledgers are reconciled mostly. Disputed figures are labeled as divinely ambiguous. Duplicate entries are attributed to holy enthusiasm, and a short argument about barley spoilage is left unresolved until the Lord returns or the Emperor issues guidance, whichever comes first. You and Brother Timon part as near friends. He blesses your quill, you bless his seal, there is peace. You return to Constantinople with scrolls, notes, and a newfound understanding. The monks are bureaucrats, holy bureaucrats, and like all bureaucrats, they do not serve men. They serve the form. You return to the capital full of modest confidence. You've just survived a week of monastic math. You've handled doctrinal footnotes and ecclesiastical recalibrations. You even left with 2 jars of lentil paste and a note from Brother Timon declaring you moderately trustworthy in matters of barley. You are, in short, feeling capable. This is a mistake, because today you are assigned to the most insidious task in all of Byzantine administration, drafting a non-committal imperial response. The request comes from a merchant collective in Trebizond. They've written to the emperor asking for clarification on a port levy involving wine, fish, and possibly salted apricots. The details are vague. The emperor has no opinion. The palace wants to say nothing, but they want it said formally, and they want it to look as if something was said. This is your job now. You are taken to a narrow side chamber known as the Room of Diplomatic Drafting, where sunlight is banned and the scribes speak in conditional verb tenses. You are given a chair, a scroll, a fresh quill, and a guide titled How to Construct Imperial Statements with the Maximum Appearance of Content and the Minimum Risk of Decision. You begin by reviewing previous responses. One reads, His Imperial Majesty, in his boundless wisdom, recognizes the concerns of those whose trade flows nourish the vineyards of Christian labor, and acknowledges that the ebb and flow of levies are matters best entrusted to ongoing interpretation under the enduring guidance of both policy and providence. It concludes with, Thus, let all parties proceed as is appropriate to the moment, with gratitude and restraint. You are unsure what it means. That means it's perfect. Your goal is to compose roughly 500 words that satisfy all 5 of the following bureaucratic commandments. Recognize the request. Acknowledge imperial concern. Confirm the legitimacy of nothing in particular. Imply continuity. Promise nothing that could ever be audited. You draft a first paragraph. It begins, To those whose service to commerce is matched only by their loyalty to crown and creed, be it known that their letter has passed through the eyes and hands of men both wise and numbered among the scroll-keeping faithful. You pause. Good start. You continue. The matter of levies, having touched upon both policy and practice, is under consideration within the structures deemed appropriate for such evaluation. You have now stated that something might happen, or might already have happened, or might never happen, but that if it did, it occurred appropriately. This is textbook Byzantine phrasing. Your colleague, Andronikos, who specializes in polite deflections involving commerce, stops by your desk to assist. He suggests inserting at least one Latin loanword to give the text a cosmopolitan flair. You add, The Principia of trade must be harmonized with imperial benevolence. You both nod in admiration. Principia means nothing here, but sounds important. You now turn to the second half of the response, the part where you make a gesture toward resolution without actually resolving anything. You write, As our empire has long held that the sea, like providence, is inconstant, so too must its tribute reflect both its bounty and burden. Thus, further articulation shall be offered in due time, by those whose station permits such pronouncement. In essence, someone else, later, might say something, possibly. You conclude with, May God watch over your sales, your sellers, and your calculations. You affix the seal of the Department of Maritime Correspondence, which hasn't existed in 20 years, sign it in the name of a mid-ranking functionary who is currently on pilgrimage, and submit the document for final approval. It is returned with only one note. Insert more synonyms for review. You comply. You revise your draft to include examination, observation, ongoing discernment, and preliminary contemplation. Now it is perfect. Byzantine bureaucracy wasn't just good at evading decisions, it made non-committal writing a sacred craft. Entire schools of scribes were trained not in clarity, but in what might best be called administrative cloud weaving. You are taught how to recognize a decision without agreeing to it, how to describe a policy in the future perfect subjunctive, how to refer to the emperor's unspoken opinion as though it had already been implemented in an allegorical sense. You learn never to say no. Instead, you say, "Such a matter is not presently within the temporal scope of current enactments." You learn never to say yes. Instead, the question aligns with existing considerations and shall remain within the purview of blessed review. And if asked, when, you simply say, "At the appropriate season, under favorable witness." It's not lying. It's Byzantine truth wrapped in ceremonial gauze and perfumed with hesitation. You ask your supervisor if this isn't ultimately counterproductive. He says, "No one is punished for the scroll they didn't write." You write that down. You tape it to your desk. By the end of the week, you've drafted 5 letters. All of them say different things. All of them mean the same thing. "We have heard you. We are impressed by your concern. We will now do nothing in the most elegant way possible." One letter is even read aloud at court. It receives polite applause. The merchant delegation leaves satisfied, convinced that action is forthcoming. Action is not forthcoming. But they won't realize that for months, possibly years. By then, the empire will have either updated the policy, forgotten the request, or changed the official calendar, again making all previous correspondence void until retroactively rephrased. You return home exhausted. Writing nothing takes effort. Saying nothing with flourish takes craft. And being proud of saying nothing, that takes a Byzantine education. Today, your name appears on a notice posted in the vestibule next to a bowl of stale olives and a partially gnawed scroll stub. The parchment reads, "By order of the logothetes, the position of Assistant Registrar of Maritime Accounting is hereby elevated to the status of Acting Deputy in absentia." You look around. There is no registrar. There is no Maritime Accounting Office. There hasn't been a Maritime Accounting Office since the Empire lost most of its fleet to a fishing rights dispute in 1387. Nonetheless, you have been promoted. Congratulations. Promotion in the Byzantine bureaucracy is not earned. It is not awarded for talent, initiative, or ideas. It is granted primarily through a rare combination of invisibility, non-association with scandal, and outliving your rivals. You are now officially the acting deputy of a department that no longer technically exists. You get a new desk slightly less crooked and access to a drawer previously locked shut for 17 years. Inside is a spoon, a wax mold of an outdated seal, and a faded icon of Saint Menas, patron of lost things. It is perfect. You ask your superior what your new responsibilities are. He shrugs and mutters, probably compiling the shipping ledgers from Thessaloniki, unless that was reassigned, or abolished, or deemed sensitive. He then hands you a scroll dated 1365 and says, "This needs archiving." The scroll is blank. You nod. The truth is, promotions in Byzantium function less like a ladder and more like sedimentary layering. You accumulate titles the way ruins accumulate dust, gradually, unintentionally, inevitably. A few examples from your colleagues. Your friend Theodosios started as a junior notarial assistant and is now the second reviser of posthumous grant confirmations, unratified division. Your neighbor in the scriptorium holds the position of provisional subarchivist emeritus, non-salaried. The woman across the hall is mistress of marginalia and overseer of phrasal consistency in decrees of moderate urgency. No one knows what anyone else does. That's part of the safety net. What matters most is that your name is now in more scrolls than before. More scrolls means more people avoiding your name when assigning blame. It also means you are harder to erase unless someone petitions for an administrative reorg, which requires no fewer than 6 signatures and an endorsement from someone in a hat. Hats are rare. You are, for now, safe. You consider being proactive. You make a list of documents you might organize, inquiries you might follow up on, departments you might coordinate with. Then you see what happened to Andronikos. Andronikos, previously known for his elegant footnotes and dangerously tidy desk, tried to implement a filing system that reduced scroll redundancy by nearly 14%. The proposal reached the logothetes. The logothetes interpreted this as criticism. Andronikos is now senior coordinator of ink allocation on monastic correspondence, stationed 2 days from the capital, in a tower shared with bats. You crumple your list. You spill ink on it. You blame the courier. Everyone nods. Promotions also come with new ceremonial obligations. You must now stand during the monthly acknowledgement of office holders, a ritual in which everyone above a certain threshold of dignity is asked to bow before a bust of Constantine while chanting their full title. This lasts 3 hours. You forget your full title halfway through and improvise a phrase from the Psalms. No one notices. You are congratulated for your humility. With promotion comes jealousy. Your ink rations are slightly better. Your desk is closer to the window. You are now invited to the inner courtyard where more senior officials chew olives and pretend to be reviewing documents while watching pigeons argue. One afternoon, a junior clerk accidentally knocks over your inkpot. He apologizes. He then asks if you're hiring assistants. You are not, but you now know to keep your scrolls off the edge of the desk. You are learning. You reflect on your progress. You are now slightly more respected, slightly more ignored, and considerably more responsible for work that doesn't technically exist. You begin to understand the beauty of Byzantine promotion. It does not burden you with authority. It protects you with ambiguity. The more obscure your role, the harder it is to fire you, or even describe you. This is, paradoxically, job security. Late one evening, you're alone in the scriptorium. A night clerk stops by and asks what your new role involves. You consider responding truthfully, but instead you say, primarily overseeing coordination in procedural contexts. He nods sagely. He does not ask further. That is how you know you've said it correctly. The audit begins on a Tuesday. No one expected it. The empire, at this point, is functionally on fire. The Treasury has defaulted on 3 grain shipments, 2 provinces have changed hands without anyone updating the maps, and the imperial palace has begun charging rent for sun-facing windows. And yet, the auditors arrive. They wear grey robes, their faces are smooth, unreadable, and slightly damp from long travel. They carry scrolls, small knives for cutting wax, and blank expressions. They are from the Office of Procedural Veracity and Revenue Harmonization, a department so old that even the emperor is afraid of it. Your name is on their list. The lead auditor is a man named Zosimos, which may or may not be his real name. He speaks slowly, as if each word is being run past a silent advisory board in his head. He introduces himself by reciting an inventory of your last 6 years of employment. You were promoted by administrative inertia in 1447, confirmed by reassignment in 1449, held responsible for regional estimates in 1450, and most recently credited with oversight of undefined maritime accounts in 1451. He pauses. Please explain what it is you do. You consider a number of answers. All of them are wrong. So instead you say, as delegated by higher clerical discretion, I manage transitional documentation in cross-departmental flux. He nods. You are safe. For now. The audit lasts 12 days. They check everything. Your scrolls, your seals, your use of margins, the rate at which you consume ink, whether you refer to the emperor with sufficient piety, whether you've reused parchment in violation of Canonical Preservation Clause B, 3.2. They even weigh your wax. Your neighbor in the next office is found to have used a personal stamp on a minor transport permit. She is reassigned to a legal clarification committee in Pontus. This is considered merciful. Each morning begins with the same question. Have your scrolls been reconciled with the archive log? You say yes. Then they ask, Have the archive logs been reconciled with the secondary log of reconciliations? You say yes again, softer this time. Then they ask, do you have proof? You present a parchment labeled Summary of Convergence. They examine it under candlelight for 20 minutes. Finally, Zosimos grunts. Ink is recent, suspiciously so. You say nothing. They move on. The worst part of the audit is not the fear. It is the questions you had never thought to ask. Questions like, why is this scroll labeled urgent but dated 2 emperors ago? Why does this seal match one used on a fishery decree? Why is your signature slightly more enthusiastic in spring months? They aren't just auditing your records. They're auditing your personality. You begin to dream of ledgers. Not the contents, just the sound of parchment flipping endlessly. The rustle of your professional obituary being written 1 footnote at a time. You find yourself waking up in the middle of the night to revise your summaries, just in case someone finds a misplaced comma and attributes it to iconoclastic tendencies. Your hands shake. Your scrolls are very neat. Then, on the 12th day, Zosimos calls you into the vestibule. He holds a single parchment. He looks at you. There are inconsistencies, he says. Your mouth is dry. You nod. You agree. Yes, life is inconsistency. Everything is flux. Even the empire, especially the empire. Then he says, but your inconsistency is consistent. You blink. You are, in fact, remarkably average, unthreatening, competent but unremarkable. You have failed to be memorable. You have filed everything with diligence and fear. We find this acceptable. He signs the parchment. You are certified. You do not smile. Smiling may be seen as gloating, or worse, relief. You bow. He leaves. The audit is over. You return to your desk. Nothing has changed, and that is a gift. You are now a man who has survived the office of procedural veracity. Your colleagues treat you with a new reverence. You are invited to more lunches. A junior scribe discreetly asks if you'd be willing to endorse his petition for a robe allowance. You say yes. You are not powerful, but you are now part of the system in a deeper way. Tested, measured, filed, and returned. And in the quiet that follows, you realize the final lesson of the Byzantine bureaucracy. The goal was never efficiency. It was continuity. To remain, to persist, to outlive those who demand answers by drowning them in footnotes. You open a fresh scroll. You begin writing. You do not know what it's for yet. But one day, someone will read it, and they will know you were here, and you did it properly.